Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, your number one source for income-oriented investing. And I'm back with Nicholas Murch from Purpose. He's a portfolio manager. How's it going, Nick? Welcome back.
It's great. Thanks so much for having me back on.
I really appreciate your time. And today we're going to talk about and discuss the Purpose Solana ETF. So just a quick disclaimer to the audience here. This is going to be for purely educational purposes. We're here to learn about the Purpose Solana ETF, which was recently launched. So just a disclaimer, this is not financial advice. It's just for educational purposes. So Nick, let's just get started with probably the first question that my audience has and that I have personally, because I am not a crypto expert at all. Can you please explain what exactly Solana is?
Yeah, that's right. And there's a lot going on in this crypto space, and you have to really start to understand what the different blockchain technologies are doing. And Solana really does occupy this unique space in crypto. So if Bitcoin is the digital gold and Ethereum is the general purpose world computer, Solana is really like the high speed, super scalable platform that's aiming to be the Visa network of crypto, if you will. So technically, Solana differentiates itself with sheer performance. So we're talking thousands of transactions per second and very low fees, so fractions of a penny. So that's something neither Bitcoin nor Ethereum can do on their base layers today. So Solana is very much built for scale. It's really trying to enable this global scale consumer application on blockchain. So think social networks, gaming, high frequency trading, and DeFi with no weighting and very low costs for users. So in terms of the ecosystem, Solana has a very vibrant one. Lots of developers, a growing DeFi scene, and it was also big in NFTs. Some of the hottest NFT collections all launched on Solana, really leveraging its speed. But we're seeing one of the major use cases now in a lot of these stable coins. It's even branching into certain things like Solana Pay for merchants, so very quite versatile. So where does this fit in terms of the overall portfolio? Many see Solana as a complement to Ethereum. So it's one of the top 10 crypto assets by market cap now. It's really earned a seat at the table next to the big names. An investor might hold Bitcoin for the store of value aspect, Ethereum for the broad smart contract exposure, and then Solana is a much more growth oriented bet on sort of this next gen blockchain technology.
Interesting. So I like how the comparison to like the Visa. So it seems to me like it's
Mhm.
designed for fast financial transactions for all kinds of applications. So okay, very interesting. So you guys launched the Purpose Solana ETF, and one thing that I noticed, and maybe you could give me a description about how this ETF actually works. It seems to me very simply
Mhm.
that it just holds Solana, right? You have the number, how many you have in here. There's a management fee of 39 basis points. But another thing I noticed is that staking. So this could be, can you
Yes.
please explain how the staking works, how this ETF in particular works?
Yeah, for sure. So structurally, SOLL is a passive spot ETF. So for
Okay.
each share, we hold a corresponding amount of SOL tokens in cold storage, and we use independent institutional custodians like Gemini and Coinbase custody to securely hold this Solana. So on top of that, we do something extra. So we stake the Solana, as you had mentioned. So Solana is a proof of stake blockchain, meaning you can lock up tokens to help secure the network, and you earn rewards for doing this. So Purpose actually runs its own Solana validators to do this, and this is very proprietary to what we do. And the benefit of this is yield. So currently, Solana's staking yields are around 5 to 7% annually. I think it's 5.5% right now. And those rewards accrue directly to the ETF. So this will boost the fund's return in the form of this increase in NAV compared to just holding SOL on its own. And importantly, investors don't have to do anything or worry about the technical details. So that they don't have to worry about the lockup periods or managing these private keys. It's very seamless. So if you hold the ETF, behind the scenes, we're generating all this extra SOL for the fund. So the structure really marries the price exposure with income generation. Also worth noting that we do offer a couple different classes. There's a CAD
Mhm.
hedged version, a non-hedged CAD, and a USD version. So you can choose your currency exposure, but all three share the same underlying Solana staking strategy. And overall, the goal here is really to make sure investors get that full crypto native benefits. So that price upside plus the staking yield all in one package with the ease of trading as an ETF.
Interesting. And I see this Solana live rate here. Does this have to do with the staking or is this something else?
So that one right there does have something to do with the staking in terms of that 7.55%. But
Yeah.
if you look at kind of where the staking right now is on Solana, it's a little bit closer to kind of that 5.5 range. So that live rate there is may fluctuate, but what
Yeah.
we're seeing is that rate will move around in terms of activity and volume on the network. But over the long period of time, the way you can think about it is that 5 to 7%.
5 to 7%. Okay, and just to be clear, this ETF does not, or you don't plan, or I'll just ask you, does it have any distributions, or is the yield from the staking, like you mentioned, going to increase or be accretive to the NAV? Like we'll actually see the growth of the NAV and not, monthly distributions like your Bitcoin or Ethereum covered call ETFs. This is not a covered call strategy or anything like that, right?
That's right. So in its current form, what we're doing right now with the staking
Yeah.
is as we get rewarded in Solana, those units are occurring directly into the ETF, and we do not pay out distributions currently. But what we're also doing is really listening to the community. If the
Okay.
community comes out and says, "Hey, look, if we want that 5 to 7% distributions and we want those paid out," this is definitely something we're talking about internally and could be introduced to the product lineup further, maybe in the future. But right now, the way that we see it is that 5 to 7%, the yield that you can generate being directly held back into SOL tokens, it's essentially a reinvestment mechanism right now. So it's something
Reinvestment.
that we're
Okay.
looking at in terms of having some of those distributions, but right now you can consider it kind of like a reinvestment.
Interesting. Okay, and in terms of the price of Solana, it's been pretty volatile, like many cryptos. So how's Solana been doing recently, and what should investors know about its performance versus other benchmarks that we could compare it to?
Yeah, for sure. So this thing is not safe from a lot of the volatility that we've seen in the crypto space. So during that 2022 crypto crash, Sol fell from around 250 to under $10, so a huge drop. But since then, it's really made an astonishing comeback. So just earlier this year in January, Solana hit a new all-time high around $294. So that was a real milestone, showing that it can recover and even surpass from its 2021 peaks. So anyone who invested in the mid 2022 kind of era at the low has really seen tremendous performance. Now for the SOLL ETF, since we just launched in April, we don't have a very long history in this product, but essentially the performance of this fund is going to mirror Solana's plus that staking yield that I had mentioned. And in the first few weeks of trading, Sol moved up about 20 to 30% move off the inception price because the underlying token really did climb in that period. That said, I always caution that with crypto, these swings can go both ways. So Solana's volatility is several times higher than, say, equity positions, and it's not really unusual for Sol to swing sort of 5 to 10% in a single day. So while the ETF has outperformed most traditional assets recently, simply because Sol did, it can also underperform and experience sharp drawdowns if crypto sentiment kind of turns. But as a benchmark, we're essentially tracking Sol's market price. So investors should really be mentally prepared for the ride in terms of the volatility that you can see. But over the longer periods here, what we're seeing is a big push in terms of regulations coming in. The deregulation, sorry, is coming in. And not only deregulation, but the proper regulation. Because before we were applying all these new antiquated frameworks and not really doing this from a first principles perspective. But now what we're seeing is it's really starting to open up and then adoption is starting to spike as well. So all of these are some really, really great tailwinds in terms of just moving this forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of buzz going on, especially with the White House administration, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. First, I just want to ask you about the current macro environment. In terms of the U.S. fiscal picture, it looks challenging, right? We all heard about the big deficit. And there's also a new tax bill proposal that could lead to more debt. So these are a lot of these are fiscal issues on investors' minds. So does this actually matter for crypto investors? How does it impact things like Solana or Bitcoin if there is actually an impact?
For sure. So if you think about rising debt and these huge deficits, they really do matter at least in terms of sort of this broader narrative. Because one of the original value propositions of Bitcoin, for example, was as a hedge against irresponsible fiscal and monetary policy. Essentially, it's a hedge against currency debasement. And when you see trillion-dollar deficits year after year, it really raises concern about the long-term value of fiat currency. So historically, governments in heavy debt have had an incentive or at least a tendency to inflate their currency or keep interest rates low, which can erode purchasing power. But crypto, being kind of outside that system, can look attractive in these scenarios. So, for instance, Bitcoin supply is capped. It doesn't care how big the US deficit is. It can't print more than 21 million coins. So that narrative gains strength when a lot of these deficits really start to balloon, as you had mentioned that we're seeing right now. And we're also seeing rating agencies and economists flag this issue. I mean, Moody's recently put out a spotlight on long run US fiscal imbalances, and they even downgraded US credit rating from AAA in part due to some of these debt concerns. So, big picture here, high deficits and debt can really undermine the confidence in a lot of these fiat currency systems and these traditional financial systems, which it can really in turn drive some investors towards alternatives like crypto. Now, specifically for Solana or some of these altcoins, they're not seen as an inflation hedge in the way sometimes Bitcoin is. So Solana is more of a tech platform investment. But if the general tide turns where people want to allocate, say, 1 to 5% of their portfolio to crypto as a hedge or diversifier because of some of these macro factors, Solana is going to very likely benefit from part of that rising tide. And it's also worth noting that some very loose fiscal policy could lead to more liquidity in the system, depending on how it's financed. And abundant liquidity has really historically been really good for risk assets, including crypto. However, you do have to be careful here. It's not a simple kind of direct correlation here, and crypto does have its own cycles. For example, in that 2022 period that I had mentioned, we saw crypto crash even as deficits were large due to other factors. But philosophically, yeah, the ballooning deficit strengthens the long-term case for a lot of these assets.
Yeah, you talked about the weakening, U.S. dollar. Have you guys, at Purpose, I know you guys are asset managers and maybe you have some insight that I definitely don't have. Are you seeing certain shifts in trends, like where capital is flowing, maybe out of the U.S. or out of the fiat, like you said, and finding its way into crypto, either like Bitcoin or Solana? Are you guys seeing that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the old kind of sense was that the US was the only game in town. And look, they're not the only game in town anymore. So over the last year or so, we've seen periods where either European or Asian markets have outperformed US markets and some capital rotation as a result. And the US dollar really had a big surge when the Fed was hiking rates aggressively. But now with the Fed potentially closer to a pause, the dollar comes off its highs, the Dixie is really softened from that 2022 peak. And when the dollar weakens, historically assets like gold or emerging market stocks really get this boost, and crypto can be part of that story as well. So, for example, in the late 2020 to 2021 period, what we had was a weaker dollar and low real interest rates, which coincided really with this big kind of crypto bull run. Now, correlation, again, not causation, because global investors do look at crypto as an international asset class because it's not tied to any single economy. So if you're concerned that the dollar might steadily decline over the long run due to those deficits or whatever else, you might allocate a lot more to hard assets and alternatives, and crypto, including Solana, could benefit from that mindset.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a new financial ecosystem is like is being born right before our eyes. And you talked about this a little bit. There's a lot of buzz around legislation. Obviously, the new
Mhm.
administration in the White House is pretty pro crypto, I guess we could say. And they have the Genius Act. Like there's actually a bill
Yeah.
that's in progress, which is going to require which is mostly about stablecoin legislation. It's going to require things like stablecoin issuers to hold 100% reserve backing, generally bring some regulation, some federal oversight. So, what impact could this have, if the bill goes through on the crypto market? And will it impact, you think, the Solana or the ETF in any way?
Yeah, I think this is a big development. So that Genius Act that you had referenced basically aims to integrate stablecoins into the US financial regulatory framework. So it's saying that stablecoins should be safe like money market funds, fully reserved, audited, redeemable on demand. And if it passes, the immediate effect is really increased trust and legitimacy for stablecoins. And that could be huge because stablecoins are a foundational piece of the crypto economy. They're the way a lot of people hold value and move money around in crypto without going back to fiat. So for the market, having very clear rules could invite more institutional participation here. Now, for Solana specifically, Solana has been a really popular blockchain for stablecoins. So people might not know, but over 12 billion of stablecoins are on Solana right now, and that's mostly USDC and USDT. And if USDC, for example, becomes a federally approved digital dollar, that's very positive for Solana because it means big players might be more comfortable using USDC for payments or DeFi on Solana. And Solana's advantage here, again, is that on the stablecoin front, the transactions are very fast and very cheap, way more efficient than even Ethereum's L1. And we're going to see higher stablecoin volumes on Solana if regulation boosts overall stablecoin adoption. And overall, I think the newly regulated stablecoins will choose Solana as their network as well. So we're going to have even greater network effects here. And I can tell you there's a lot of projects that are already preparing. So we've seen Paxos announce a USDG on Solana, and even other banks really, or fintechs, potentially issuing their own stablecoins if they're allowed. So this really creates Solana being that go-to chain, and it's going to really develop a lot of network effects, which will really boost the transaction volumes, therefore really bolstering the strength of the currency.
Wow, that's awesome, exciting stuff. In on the horizon. So for investors, I consider myself more of an old school investor. I like to invest on the stock market, and this is a regulated ETF on the Canadian exchange. So what are the advantages of getting your ETF versus just buying Solana like on a crypto exchange, something I've never even explored personally? Do you see any differences or any advantages going with the ETF instead of just, buying it with a wallet or whatever on an exchange?
Yeah, so I would say that the biggest reasons are simplicity, security, and the access to staking rewards here, which we all do behind the scenes. So if you buy Sol on your own, you really need to manage digital wallet, keep your
Yeah.
private keys safe. You know about writing those 16-word passcodes on a piece of paper that you might lose in a couch or something. And you might have to use an exchange, which really introduces additional counterparty risk. And to figure out the staking, if you want that extra yield, is another headache. So with SOLL, all of that is handled for you. So you buy it through your normal brokerage, just like a stock, no
Yeah.
new accounts, no technical setup. And the ETF really custodies the assets with regulated and insured custodians. So that really addresses the security part. So you're not going to lose your tokens because you forgot a password or you got hacked. It's professionally managed. And another angle here is the regulatory peace of mind. So the ETF is overseen by a lot of different regulators. These assets are audited, and so on. So some investors and advisors really prefer that framework as opposed to kind of the wild west of self-custody. And also on top of that, SOLL again automatically does the staking. So if you hold Sol in your wallet, you can stake, but it requires some know-how and some of this regular monitoring or certain lockups or delegation periods. But in our case, we're running the validators in-house and optimizing that process for you. So you really get a lot here with this product, all into one very simple to easy to use and easy to access ETF.
Yeah, I mean, simplicity is the name of the game, especially for, more old school investor like myself and my audience, which tends to be a little bit the older crowd that invests more traditionally. And yeah, I mean, the management fee on all of them, right? Like you said, you have SOLL, that's a stock symbol for the one that's hedged to the Canadian dollar, but you have a .B version that's not hedged to the Canadian dollar. You have a .U version if you want to buy and sell it in USD currency. I see the management fees all at 39 basis points. So this is a pretty reasonable management fee if you ask me. Of course, the MER is not out. We'll have to wait for a year. But yeah, very, very
That's right.
simple. You could buy this in your RSP, in your TFSA, in a regular cash account, right? Like any other ETF. So super, super simple. Just two last questions, because I know, and you've already talked about the risks a little bit, but I'm going to ask you again. In terms of risk, we know that crypto is a little bit more, it is more volatile than stocks and bonds. So how should an investor think about the risk associated with Solana specifically? I know you talked a little bit about it, but just to make sure we hit the point home, Solana risk, what would you say?
Yeah, so I think that you're absolutely right to bring up risks, and investors really need to fully understand these. And this is something that we've always emphasized. So crypto really is a high risk asset class, full stop. And Solana is that prime example of it because you have seen those huge swings. So we mentioned how Sol went from around $250 down to under 10 and then back to 250, and that kind of volatility is extreme. So investors really have to be prepared for the possibility of very significant drawdowns. And Solana specifically has a few risk factors to note. So they've got market risk. So if the crypto market sentiment sours, it can drop along with it. There's technical risk. So Solana's network has experienced outages or slowdowns in the past. There's also competition from other blockchains. And if Solana fails to keep innovating, it could get left behind. There also could be liquidity risk where Sol is very highly traded now, but smaller altcoins can face liquidity crunches and stress scenarios. And there's also a little bit of regulatory risk broadly. So if regulations came out restricting this, it could really impact some of the volumes. However, what we're really starting to see is a lot of these trends are starting to go the way of reducing risk on nearly every front here. So crypto as an asset class, if you look at it in terms of the ETF AUM, it surpassed gold. Well, maybe not because of gold's certain price rise over the last couple year-to-date numbers here, but very close in terms of the total AUM here. So it's largely becoming institutionalized. And then on top of that, if we do get some of this favorable legislation on the stablecoin front, what we're going to see is a lot of that liquidity risk really start to go away because there's going to be more and more transaction on this transacting on this network. So a lot of different kind of trends that are going on here that are really mitigating all these risks that I just outlined.
Yeah, that's great. Would you say like Ethereum is Solana's main competition? I know you talked about it a little bit. Like, what would you say is Solana's competition in terms of other cryptos that have similar functionality? What would you say are like the top two, top three competitors of Solana? And sorry, because I have no idea. So
Yeah, yeah, no, fair enough. And I think they're different in terms of the function, right? So Solana again is that kind of much higher transaction, much more throughput, much lower cost system, whereas like an Ethereum is much more kind of a smart contract network based on that. So in terms of the competition for the individual tokens that you think of, I do think you can think of them as very separate. Bitcoin has a function, Ethereum has a function, and
right.
Solana has its own function. But in terms of just kind of mind share, that's where you see a lot of people just kind of crowding towards one crypto currency because they understand something better. But I think if you go peel back the layers and just look at all the technical advantages that Solana has, it's really going to benefit from a lot of this deregulation and a lot of this unlock of people building actually very utility generating products on this infrastructure. So if you tried to build, say, a transactive network around a system of renewable energy nodes. So you had solar, you had a battery, and then you had sort of a transformer or that sits on this grid. If you wanted to build a transactive network between all these and do so using a cryptocurrency, you would need something that's very high transaction volume and very low cost. That's exactly what a Solana would be able to do. And previously, this was by Gary Gensler, the SEC, was completely outlawed. You couldn't do this if it created any utility, but you could put
Yeah.
together kind of this picture of a cat, and that was totally legal. So you're seeing massive unlocks there. So really, you got to peel back in terms of looking at the other cryptos from a competition perspective and say, okay, what's the technical underpinnings of this? And very different from other cryptocurrencies.
Perfect. So I don't like price predictions. On YouTube, there's full of Bitcoin and Solana price predictions. Some of them are absolutely crazy. But what would be your outlook for Solana and the crypto market moving into 2025? We got a lot of exciting things in 2025, like the legislation that we talked about. So, what are the key developments that you guys at Purpose are looking for in the future?
Yeah, so I typically shy away from target prices as well because it's sometimes easy to put one on a headline and it grabs a lot of attention. But what I tend to do instead is follow the kind of much more secular movements that occur. And so I would say that cautious optimism is my stance. And the crypto market in 2025 has been very constructive so far. So we've seen a rebound in prices. We've seen a ton of building and positive developments underneath that. And for Solana specifically, we're watching network adoption metrics very closely. So daily active users, number of active developers, transaction volumes, all that good stuff. And those have been trending all in very positive direction. So for instance, Solana not only is retaining users, but also gaining a lot of new ones through all these different applications. And we got news that even MetaMask, one of the most popular crypto wallets, is adding support for Solana. So big deal in terms of making Solana more accessible for a broader crypto community. And developments like that, so more integrations, more tooling, easier user experience can really be a large catalyst for future growth. And we're also seeing Solana make technical strides. So upgrading and new implementations, which could make the network even faster and more resilient. So on the technology and adoption front, very bullish, and we think Solana really has a strong roadmap here and a very active ecosystem, which does really bode well for the long-term value. So just kind of in summary here on long-term trends we see is that blockchain technology is only growing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the early internet phase. There's ups and
Yes.
downs, but each cycle we come out with is going to have a higher base of users and activity. And Solana is really one of those networks at the forefront of making blockchain usable at scale, which is what we're very, very excited about. And over the next few years, if it continues to execute, we could see it becoming really a backbone for a lot of applications, which should reflect in its value. So for investors in SOLL, that's the bet you're taking. The adoption will translate into appreciation of SOL, plus you earn yield while you wait. And we remain very optimistic, but also realistic. It's a fast-moving industry. We're going to ensure that it continues to operate smoothly from a technical perspective. But we're in this because we believe really in the long-term potential. And as always, we encourage a long-term view to match that because crypto can surprise us in the short run. But
Yeah.
over the long run, we think the trajectory of innovation is very clear. And Solana's story, I think, is just getting started.
Well, Nick, you've been great as usual, my friend. This has been an educational, informational fest. I encourage everyone to check out Purpose website here, where you could actually read a little bit more on Solana. You guys also have quite a bit of articles on crypto in general. I see here Solana 101 white paper. You guys could check out you have all the stock symbols here for the hedged one, the non-hedged, also a .u version as well. You could read a little bit more information about it. So once again, Nick, thanks so much for your time. I hope you come back on the channel soon, and thank you for informing us and keeping us up to speed on this whole new world, I would say. So hope to see you again soon, my friend. Take care.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Take care.